Well, we've made it into February, and it's time for our Allied Cooperative Program. I've got Chris Curran. He is dairy nutritionist out of Hickston. Well, we've made it into February, and we still need to manage our feed inventories. What is some of the advice that you have for us?
There's a few key goals that I'll start out with here. Managing inventory according to quality. So this is important so we know what to do with that hay, haylage, maybe corn silage that's not quite up to par, and figuring out what groups of cattle that it would best be fed to. Lower quality forage could be used for bred heifers. We always want to avoid the milking herd on a dairy for these types of forage. Separating haylage in different bags, silos, or bunkers will allow them to be used accordingly. It's very frustrating having cows milking well and then hitting some low-quality forage in a bag or bunker and then throwing the cows off 3 to 5 pounds of milk. It takes time to adjust the ration and bring them back on production. Also, for a beef producer, a lot of round bales fed. Keeping those round bales segregated by crop. If you got first crop, second, third, and really keeping an eye out for mold. If there's any mold, we want to avoid that for especially pregnant animals and younger calves. So you really need to be cautious of that and test as needed. Far-off dry cows would be another good group to blend in lower quality feeds as long as you balance the ration accordingly, depending on nutrients and especially mineral values. Calves will need dry hay that is high quality and best a grass mix to have a softer, more palatable feed than a straight alfalfa would be. Don't always rely on relative feed values or relative feed qualities to determine quality for calves. That could lead to feeding a straight alfalfa that may be too stemmy. This results in poor performance and just lower feed intake, and then you get a lot of waste at the bunk with leftover stems. Baleage is a great option to improve quality, palatability, and reduce feed waste from the refusals. They really like it, and they clean it up well in most cases. Well, it works well in most groups of cattle, but for smaller calves, it needs to be on the drier side until their rumen is fully developed, and that's usually around that 400-pound size. Keep moistures mid-range on baleage, not too wet to form too much butyric acid, or too dry to avoid mold formation.
And now looking at those inventories here in February, we still need to figure out if we have enough to make it through until the grass grows again. What is some of your advice out there to get that figuring done?
So with inventory, we just want to be proactive. A lot of times on some farms, we're looking back in the summer and we've taken first crop hay off and maybe we've taken second crop hay off. At that point, real good idea on how the crop is going to shape up for tonnage in the end. So, it gets you thinking about, okay, if third crop is light, then we kind of know. And on a dairy, we're taking 4 to 5 cuttings. Usually the tonnage is pretty variable depending on the weather in the later summer. But at that point, we're thinking about it and looking, do we need more hay? And if you need dry hay, it is best to buy it, out of the field in late summer. You want to avoid buying it in January, February, March. It's a great time to sell, probably not as good of a time to buy. So if you determine that ahead of time, you'll be ahead of the game. And a couple other things here that I had, do your math ahead of time so you know how much you're going to need for your groups of cattle or your dairy herd. On the silage side and the hay, you just multiply your number ahead times the days fed and the pounds. And then also, we always have to figure in a shrink factor of like 10 to 15%, and that's for storage and feeding losses. With corn silage inventory, we like to, on a dairy farm, we like at least 2 months of fermentation before feeding. Beef cattle can get by with less. So we always plan for December 1st to open up new crop on a dairy. It's best to be proactive, and see what you're going to need ahead of time. Some dairies need to purchase high-fiber byproducts such as corn gluten feed, soy hulls, or cottonseed to help stretch haylage or corn silage. We also use these to improve ration digestibility, to improve milk production also. Late summer, fall is a a better time to purchase or forward contract these ingredients. The sooner you know you're going to need something, the sooner you can get to the market or get to your supplier and say, hey, this is what my needs are. What does the market look like? And if you've got time, you can usually get a little better price. The Allied Co-op's feed division has a strong commodity and contracting department working with feed and grain to meet your needs in this area.
On this Wednesday in February, make sure you take a look at your inventories. Have enough to last until the grass grows again. And that's our Allied Cooperative Program with Chris Curran. He's the dairy nutritionist from Hickston. And I'm Jill Welke.